Thanks everyone for joining us today. I am Scott Barrett, Associate Dean for the Maxwell School, focused on external affairs, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's event. Before we begin the conversation, I'd like to say that Maxwell recognizes with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. We also acknowledge and support those struggling against institutional racism and structural violence and who are working toward a better future. This is the latest in a series of conversations with members of the Maxwell faculty and our alumni community who are leading experts nationally and internationally on important topics of the day. We are recording this event and we will post the recording on the Maxwell YouTube channel so that alumni and friends who could not join us this afternoon can watch it as well. We're delighted to have Professor Emeritus Bob McClure joining us for another installment in our series of faculty conversations. We saw tremendous interest in his Q&A earlier this month, and we're so pleased that he agreed to return to engage with us again in a new conversation. Professor McClure has served the Maxwell School for 45 years as a faculty member and administrator, including a senior associate dean and Chapel Family Professor of Citizenship and Democracy. His interests include political leadership and the presidency, democratic institutions, and mass communication. Bob is currently working on a new book, tentatively entitled Stymied: How a Sprawling Constitution, Rival Cultures, a Complex Constitution, and Popular Make-Believe Help Create Deadlock in Washington and Dash America's 21st Century Expectations for Government. Bob founded the Maxwell School's MAX courses, the introductory team-taught interdisciplinary undergrad courses on citizenship and global community, a hallmark of the school through which generations of alumni have come to know and love the Maxwell School. Excuse me. Previous to Maxwell, Bob served as legislative assistant to Congressman Lee Hamilton and as a journalist for the Scripps Howard newspapers and the St. Petersburg Times. From 1986 to 89, Bob was director of the University Honors Program, and from 1990 to 2003, associate dean and senior associate dean of the Maxwell School. He retired as chapel chair in 2010 and from active political science teaching faculty in 2014. Ever the dedicated professor, Bob McClure suggested the theme for the new Q&A today, not long after his last conversation earlier in the month, and we're delighted to have Bob with us today. So Bob, why don't you take it from here and I will get out of your way.
Okay, thank you, Scott. And thank you all out there in Etherland for joining together a second time. Like the proverbial bad penny, I'm back. And I'm told it's all your fault that you asked for it. As before, let's begin with two readings as text for today's sermonette. The first from the enduring The 4th of July by Frederick Douglass. What to the slave is the 4th of July? I am not included in the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich heritage of justice, liberty, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, but not by me. And a second reading from the enduring poetry of Langston Hughes, written roughly a century later, Harlem. What happened to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? We all know that America's original sin is racism. The sin that cannot be escaped and at best can only be contained and mitigated by constant discipline and by good and strong character. As prophesied nearly 150 years ago by America's kindest realist, Abraham Lincoln. He said, "Not until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be spent, and every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid for by another drawn with the sword. Will America have approached its atonement? But as there is more to human sinfulness, or more to human nature than sinfulness, so there is more to America than racism. But is there enough more? That's the real question for today. And the hard task for all of us today, by our action, that there is more to each of us and more to all of us collectively than our racism. Like human nature in general, America has its better angels. And like the stories of each and every one of us individually, America's story is one of unending battle between the lesser and better angels of our nature. In today's harsh moment, we stare at a white man's knee bearing down on a black man's neck, choking the very life out of George Floyd, without the white man showing the slightest hint of remorse, and while ignoring all pleas for help. Murder in broad daylight, surrounded by silent, unmoving witnesses. It's hard to believe in better angels. All of America knows it cannot explain away this murder, no more than it can explain away all the others so similar to it over the centuries. The knee and the gun of some of today's cops are like the lynch ropes of some of the folks of yesteryear. As perhaps never before, America stands disgraced before the world, bereft of its own once lofty moral standing. Yes, it is all so true that any of those other nations that are without sin should feel free to cast the first stones. But whatever others may say or do, America alone must answer for its, at least in part, because no other nation has so unabashedly proclaimed its righteousness, so loudly, so frequently, and for so long. Here in exceptional America, it is said that all men are created equal, and we the people govern. And if you say it, you own it. Americans own this glorious rendition of our past, the shining city on a hill. And onto that hallowed hill, Americans' chickens now come home to roost. Periodically in our history, rage sparked by loss of all hope and by unending pain has erupted at America's many instances of failure to fully honor the country's ideals and to do right by our black and brothers and sisters. Each time the ragings, the cries for help, and the forced as well as voluntary confessions that follow, prompt promises that tomorrow will be a new day. Tomorrow will put a stop to America's shameful, hypocritical behavior. Tomorrow, the degrading daily indignities of small slights and big hurts that relentlessly bear down on and grind down on all Black Americans just because they are Black. White Americans mostly escape them just because they are white. Tomorrow, this painful hurtfulness will stop. Life-draining indignities and hurts because of the color of a person's skin will finally end a new day. But each time the promised new day actually dawns, the shadows over the American landscape barely shift. Only a day or two differences can be made out. The shadows have indeed moved. Oh, you can see the slight shift, all right. But the movement is too close to being imperceptible to cause much rejoicing. You must look too long and too hard to see the change. And oh, it's oh so very slow. Why? Why is every promised new day in America, each one, so little different, so like the one before? Will the rage and promise of 2020 prove any different? My answer, my personal answer, here goes. My perspective comes from a particular background. I'm old. I'm white, and I was born and raised in the Hoosier heartland. I can offer you little more than what can be developed out of that suspect DNA. In this era, where everything in politics is treated as totally black and totally white, without shades of any nuance, I am clearly white. In the age of millennials and Gen Zers, where everything is all about the young, I'm clearly old, older than even baby boomers. I'm so old, my baby bunch doesn't even have a fancy name. I'm so old that sometimes while reading, I'm barely awake, let alone completely woke. But I can still listen, perhaps better now than in days past, when I did have better hearing. I also think I still remember, although sometimes with less than total clarity. In any event, that's me, and here I am, and there you are. I do what I can with what I got, and so do you. And I hope I do my part with an idealist open heart, but also with a realist hard head. I approach these fraught times with both my heart and my head, employing both in roughly equal measures. For I deeply believe that if we rely solely on just one or the other, we are then only more likely to further jeopardize our shared hope for a better America. We need both our hearts and our heads if we are to bend the arc of the moral universe. In my old clouded judgment, with all our hearts and heads in roughly equal proportions, struggling together to better understand each other and our collective history, can we, Black Americans and white Americans, become just Americans, and then stumble together toward the promised land? When I was a young man back in the day, way back in the 1960s, I was captured by the Supreme Court's all deliberate speed and by Martin Luther King's uplifting and rousing leadership for racial justice. And back then, I felt I was woke. I marched too, and I felt like the new day had finally arrived. Serving in Washington, D.C. as an aide to a member of Congress, I rejoiced in the passage of the three great civil rights laws of the era. My confidence grew that this was the beginning of a new day. I still believe those new laws back in those old days did make today a different day, a better day. The police chief in Minneapolis is now Black. The mayor in Atlanta is Black. So is the Fulton County prosecutor. And so are the lead prosecutors in the cases of Ahmaud Arbery and Rayshard Brooks. Mayor of Ferguson, Missouri is now Black, and on and on. Today's two-tone picture was certainly not the one-tone picture of power back in my day. The portrait of American power holders has changed. This change has to have some consequence. The political work of the 60s seems to me an indisputably proximate cause for America looking noticeably different today, and for a better America for all as well. One different day at a time. The shadows have now clearly shifted to a different light on things than it was when it was only barely discernible. But I know it, it's still not a new day. And yes, I'm still white. Will more laws coming out of today's Washington sufficiently alter the behavior of the Minneapolis Police Department in the near future? In the city of Ferguson, the folks of Brunswick and Atlanta, Georgia, in Chicago, Illinois, and Louisville, Kentucky, and all the other cities and towns across America. Will these new laws now finally result in the promised new day? Today's new laws slowly make another day, a different day, just as the laws of the 1960s made a different day. Hopefully a little better day, but laws alone can never make a new day, however fervently we may pray. More than a century ago, Lincoln gave us a hint why. In the second of two responses on different nights in November 1864, the crowds gathered on the White House lawn to serenade him on his re-election. Lincoln spoke briefly. He was generous to friends and foes alike. He was himself. And then he said this: human nature will not change in any future national trial compared with men of this. We shall have and as strong, as silly and as wise, as bad and as good. Let us therefore study the incidents of this as philosophy to learn wisdom from, and none of them as wrongs to be revenged. Well then, if Lincoln is correct, what does it take for a new day? Revolution. Complete regime change. If American problems are as deeply systemic as so many say, it seems nothing else will fix things but a regime change. Ponder, founding Americans thought that revolution was what was needed in 1776. Even though their list of grievances against the British king in the Declaration of Independence is far shorter and spans a far briefer time than the list of grievances compiled by Black Americans against white Americans throughout our history. They thought revolution was the choice for redressing their much shorter list of grievances. But if not revolution today, then Black Americans and white Americans must somehow come to terms with one another, even though we still have so little day-to-day personal contact with each other. It's estimated that only 1 in 5 Americans have frequent, sustained social contact with persons of the other color. We live in separate worlds, a Black America and a white America. Somehow, after more than a century, we are still Frederick Douglass's immeasurable distance apart. The distance must close. We must close the distance to see and know the same America in our history books and in our hearts and minds, and also when we talk about America across a common dinner table in casual conversation. This entails having to change the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and the stories we tell about each other, making them more complete and truthful stories about our separate selves and about our collective self as well. We must develop sufficient trust in each other to agree on this new shared and more truthful story of America. If we can create that new American story more widely shared, then we could be at the beginning of a new day. If we can. If. Is it likely? No. The realist in me says probably not. At least not anytime soon, and certainly not without persistent, grinding efforts. This is the slow boring of hard boards in the title of these remarks. But the idealist still hopes. Drilling down through America, using a National Commission of Truth and Reconciliation, with the goal of issuing a formal apology for America's history of immoral mistreatment of Black America, could be a start. I wouldn't even rule out having the apology come with some form of reparation to emphasize that white America really means it. Commissions for this purpose have been tried elsewhere. South Africa and Northern Ireland, for instance, their results aren't very heartening, more toward sobering. It's a mixed bag, but I'm no expert. True, such a commission in America might make matters worse rather than better, might be stillborn, but on balance, I have slowly and reluctantly come to the judgment that the attempt is worth the risk and uncertainty. We must do something that tries to alter the erosion of faith in America, particularly among young people and Black people. Black Americans and white Americans simply don't trust one another. Each is afraid of the other. Until the fear ends, a new day cannot begin. Maybe the commission would help, maybe not. But my heart is open to giving it a careful, considered try, even though my head keeps saying, wait a minute. I close with words from Max Weber's Politics as a Vocation. Max Weber has a very special place in my heart. I would probably not have gotten a PhD without Max Weber. I had to pass a German proficiency exam. And although I had studied German in high school and in college, I spoke and read and thought a little in German. I'm a Hoosier. But I had to pass this exam. And so I went into the exam with great trepidation. There were some written parts, multiple choice and these sorts of things, but there was a passage that had to be translated. And when the passage was revealed, the passage came from Max Weber's Politics as a Vocation. And I had it many times in English. And I heaved a sigh of relief, and I was able to translate it evidently good enough. Because a week or so later, when I went to see my score posted on the board, I had passed by just 1 or 2 points. Max Weber probably has affected my thinking as much, almost, as James Madison. Here's what he says in Politics as a Vocation. Politics is a strong, slow boring of hard boards. It takes both passion and perspective. Certainly all historical experience confirms the truth that man could not obtain the possible unless time and again he had reached out for the impossible. But to do that, a man must be a leader, and not only a leader, but a hero as well, in a very sober sense of the word. And even those who are neither leaders nor heroes must arm themselves with that steadfastness of heart which can brave even the crumbling of hopes. This is very necessary right now, or else men will not be able to attain even that which is possible today. Only he has the calling for politics, who is sure that he shall not crumble when the world, from his point of view, is too stupid or too base for what he wants what he wants to offer. Only he who, in the face of all this, can say, in spite of it all, has the calling for politics. I deeply believe Weber sees politics to its true core. And whatever else has contributed to America's wickedness, it has been sanctioned by our politics, and it must be cast out by our politics if there is ever to be a truly new day. The 2020 election will soon test whether recent realities have aroused America's better angels. And it will, and future elections, one after another, will provide the test. And on and on. Black and whites together, slowly and persistently, in spite of it all, we must march toward a promised land that we ourselves will probably never see. Or the alternative becomes revolution, the explosion in Langston Hughes' poem. And then, altogether, blacks and whites alike, we burn, baby, burn, all together in the same inferno of the doomed and the damned. Amen.
Bob, thank you. Certainly, I have no doubt that will have folks very interested with questions and comments. So for our group, if many of you have joined us before, we'd encourage you can raise your virtual hand using the participants tab at the bottom of your screen, or you could type your question in the chat box, or Professor McClure can call on you from his seat, however he sees fit. But who would like to question or comment or talk with Professor McClure on this?
It seems like a profound silence, Scott.
Well, you gave us a lot to talk about for sure, Professor. I see Francine D'Amico has her hand up. Francine, why don't you...
Is your camera on, Francine? I haven't seen you for such a long time.
Turn your camera on at the request of Professor McClure and unmute your microphone and please ask your question.
Hi, Francine. How are you?
I'm good, Bob. How are you? So you've painted broad strokes, big policy kinds of ways to address systemic racism, at least black-white racism. But in our campus and in our classroom, a commission and reparations aren't our answer. So I was hoping maybe you could guide us to, yes, the materials you recommend for self-education, absolutely important for each one of us individually. But as educators, what's our job, Bob?
Well, Francine, that's a terrific question, and I would say you're better at answering it than I am. I'm not in the classroom anymore. I'm farther away from the people that you have to teach. And so I don't think I have any particular expertise to call on or any purchase on the question that you ask, except what always guided me as a teacher throughout my career. And that was to speak the truth as I understood it, to be demanding of my students, and to care about them, all of them. Now, does that give us an algorithm for how to do this? No. And that's the problem here with all of this. The problem is rooted in our own individual hearts and minds and how we treat each other as human beings. And are better angels. Now, the problem is sometimes one person's better angel is another person's lesser angel. Angels don't come with numbers on them. And you don't get a program that tells you this is a better angel and that one's a lesser angel. No, we have to try to figure that all out ourselves. And we've got to do it in the classroom, up close, with people of different perspectives. Now, I must say, I think one thing we cannot do is rule out some perspectives. I must say, I was appalled by the New York Times and its uprising after the op-ed and their recanting of that decision. Oh, you can do lots of things about the decision, but we can't rule things out. If we do, we'll never come to any reconciliation. Now, must we rule more things in? Yeah. But we can't gain success by ruling things out. That's the hard part. And I fear in the academy today that there's too much of the willingness to go the easy way. Rule out the bad stuff, at least what I think is bad, and we'll get on with the day. I don't think that leads to reconciliation. But I'm an old guy.
Bob, we've got a couple of questions coming in through the chat. One came into Jess Murray, and the question was, in your experience, which nation best exemplifies the boring of hard wood toward multicultural harmony, and why? Are there good examples?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question either. Francine or some of my colleagues who are versed in comparative politics and conflict resolution would know better than I. I think I know a little bit about Canada because I lived there. I've lived there in part for so long. I think they've got some level an easier problem, and they've recognized it more than we have, and have worked at it better, in my view. The problem I would want there's no doubt I can name countries that I think handle diversity better than the United States, but they don't have as much diversity. That's the problem. And they don't have America's history of racial division. Denmark and Sweden and all those nice countries in Scandinavia, they can get along better and sort some of these things out. But they don't start with the Faustian bargain that we started with. And they don't have to deal with the multiple entrenched perspectives that we do. It's not the same game. So I don't know any country as broad and sprawling in its geography, as different in its multicultures, with as complicated a structure of government, who've tried to deal with some of these problems. I would want to argue, and that's what the little book is about, we're different. It's in that sense that we're exceptional. We're not exceptional because, we're moral. We're exceptional because we got a crazy system and a bunch of crazy people. Now what do we do?
Conrad's asking, sort of maybe associated with that, Bob, does Germany provide a somewhat successful model for a national and societal admission of wrong and changing course?
Well, I'd ask him to answer that. Are any others that are listening? I don't know. It seems to me Germany has some spike in backlash and response to some of what they're doing, as might be expected. But again, I don't think that Germany has the kind of diversity that America has. Diversity is hard. It's just damned hard. And it's one of the lies we've told ourselves, that, more diversity makes everything better. We can get along better and do democracy if we've got more differences. I just think that's a lie. It makes it harder. Now we can do it, and if we can do it, we may all greatly profit from it. But it's harder.
Definitely some questions coming in, Bob. Let's see. Fran Vogel is asking, do you see a Biden presidency restoring order and putting our country back on a path where we can start to heal this divide?
Well, yes, maybe a little. As I briefly mentioned at the end, I don't think there's much prospect of recent events having sparked the possibility of a new day, unless the election in 2020 is not in favor of Joe Biden. And the bigger the margin, the better. The history of America tells me that lasting change begins with big majority victories up and down the whole American political system. Not squeakers, not even 53-47s. That'd do in this election to perhaps get things started. But a big landslide that changes the House and the Senate, that changes up and down the state houses and so forth. That would offer hope that these lessons are being, that these events are being viewed seriously across a wide enough America to perhaps begin to make a difference. And I think Joe is adept, he's experienced. He will do what a president can. But going back to what I said in the previous, presidents don't make law and order. Law and order comes from our own individual behaviors in our own individual locales. Law and order comes in Minneapolis not because what presidents do, say, or what laws Washington passes, but by what the people in Minneapolis do with respect to their own government and their own police department. So this is why things are so hard. There's not somebody that can fix them. There's not something that can do it. That's the long, slow, hard, boring that's got to be done. Because there's no quick fix. There's no single person that can do it. But I'm voting for Joe.
Along those lines, perhaps, and maybe you got to a lot of this, Bob, but let's talk about it. Our good colleague, Minch Lewis, is asking, given the divisions in our politics and in our communities, what are your thoughts about how to start towards a reconciliation commission?
Well, tell Mitch to switch on his mic.
Mitch, open your mic and talk to the good professor.
Turn on your camera. I want to see you. You're an old guy too.
I'm an old guy. I've been around even longer than you've been around. I can hardly believe it.
Oh no, you can't be around that long. Hey, you would be better at answering this question than I would be. Come on.
Oh, I think trust gets built. As you're saying, long, hard, slow process, little steps at a time. And I see a commission as something, I don't know, could that be a small enough step to start the process of building trust?
It depends on I think it depends on what it comes out with, and how convincing it is to the broad swath of the American people. Does it seem that it was fair? Does it seem that what they say makes sense and is just? So I don't know, and that's why it's a risky business. But I do think I know that we'll never get to a new day if we don't restore some of that trust. Now, have you got a different way to start it? Does anybody in this group have a different way to start it? Speak up.
It seems to me it would have to be outside politics. It has to come from the moral community somehow coming together in a way that
community speaks for America, Mitch.
Start. Look, nobody can claim it, but there are organizations that could speak, aren't there?
Well, maybe, and maybe you and I should start one. But yeah, I don't rule that out. That's certainly my understanding. It's not how it's been done elsewhere. But I don't see how you take politics out of this. This is not a separation of church and state question. It is a moral question, but in my view, politics is a moral business, and I think it is in your view too.
It is, absolutely.
Okay, so now we've got to tackle this moral business together as a people and a government. Now, maybe we can't. That's what we tried, maybe sort of in the 1850s, and I increasingly think this looks like the 1850s to me. And we failed. It all blew up, and then we killed 700,000 people.
So the reason I would think the moral community or the outside the political thing is because it seems to me it has to be not based on power. It has to be based on trust that can be built by individuals that can speak languages across the bridge.
Well, whose moral community does that?
I think they're. I don't know, but I mean, take groups.
The only moral community where I think that is tried is America's moral community, and we're going to let the evangelical community? Are we going to let the Jewish community? What moral community speaks for all of America?
It seems to me there must be a way of leaders from these communities who have a peace orientation coming together as a bridge building effort, informally, behind the scenes, not public, quietly. Look at all of the American Friends Service Committee, the Quakers, the Catholic Charity, Jewish community.
Well, there may need to be representatives on this commission of all those moral communities, but it's got to be more than that, or it'll never be taken seriously.
No, I agree with that. I'm just asking about, how do you start it? How does it?
I don't know. I think, let's say for the sake of argument, and then we got to see if we got other people want to get in.
Yeah.
But if Biden, for instance, were elected, and he would decide to appoint a rabbi, a priest, and a preacher to sit down and try to provide some guidance to him about how to form this commission, might be a way. There's a lot of ways to skin this cat. But in the end, it's got to be all of us feeling we got a voice in the game, or we'll never get reconciliation. Now, I don't know that I think they've gotten reconciliation in South Africa or in Northern Ireland. So there's no algorithm here. Scott, have we got some? Good to see you, Mitch.
We do.
Good. Thank you.
We do. We have a range, Bob, of interesting questions here. So Paula is asking, she's lived in a couple of cities adjacent to Native American nations, and she's wondering if there are lessons to be learned from our current moment that we should or must apply to relations with Native Americans, victims for so long, particularly of cruel manifestations of racism. And then connected to that, so we've got the Native American question, but then Richard tagging on to that says both relative to Native Americans, excuse me, sorry, I misread, but we have Dr. Buckley, excuse me, both in terms of Native Americans as well as Black Americans. What about, can you have reconciliation without reparations?
Well, I don't know. The questioner with that sounds like he's got an answer. And so I'd welcome the answer.
I think that's Dr. Paul Buckley, by the way.
Yeah. So if Dr. Buckley has an answer to that, I'm open. I want to hear it. I
don't.
I think I understand that without reparations, it's hard to believe, given white America's record, that we really mean it. But on the other hand, if there is reparations, it makes it harder to get agreement. I will say this, that I don't know whether Dr. Buckley has read an interesting column by David Brooks about 3 weeks ago, maybe, in the New York Times, where he proposes a way of reparations that does not include basically cutting a check to individual Black and red and brown Americans. I think that process of calculation is beyond hope. But Brooks's view about how to do it, it seems to me, is possible, and I would recommend that. Does Dr. Buckley have an answer to his question?
I don't have an answer.
so you're
that's
just
why
trying to get me.
No.
God bless you.
I asked the question because it's a question that I wrestle with. And I think, so the only answer that I have at this point is that I think if America wrestles with that question, that will make some progress. I think the wrestling with that question would take us somewhere, right? Because we're talking about an America that's built on genocide and enslavement, and we're talking about an economy that's built on genocide and enslavement. And I think if wrestling with that question involves us getting to some truth about the stories that we tell, right? And so I don't know where it would take us, but I do think the wrestling with the question would be important.
As someone I think you know said, you take the first step up the staircase, not knowing where it goes, and I think that's right. And you give me hope by what you say, my good man, because you just articulated, I think, what I see to be at the very heart of democratic politics. It can't be perfect. It can't be even necessarily good, but it's got to be good enough. All we got to do is to get to good enough. And you seem to be saying that it might be good enough for you. And if it's good enough for you, and it's good enough for the stories that come out of it, it's good enough for me. And that's where, in my view, my friend, we've got to try to get to good enough. Now, is good enough the new day? That's a different question. We can slice that one for a long time. But we just can't let the perfect promised land keep us from taking one more step in the right direction.
Another one, Professor.
Thanks for joining, my friend.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Bob.
It's okay.
Richard Bengroff is asking, rather than looking at the larger group level, in my view, real change only occurs when each of us does what we personally can to sustain the values we say we want to maximize. Each of us should ask what we personally are and can do every day. I guess that's more of a statement than a question, but thoughts on that, Professor?
He sounds to me like the same kind of Burkean conservative I am. That is, you start with the little platoons that you're a part of. I tried to practice what I preached in my home, with my friends, in my job, at the Maxwell School, in the community. That was all I knew I could control. And I couldn't control all of that, but I had a fair shot at trying to do my best. And so I couldn't agree more with the statement. That's why I caution people seeing that the salvation is in Washington, and the salvation is with a president. The salvation is with each and every one of us and with all the people around us day after day. In thinking about these remarks, I'll reveal this personal confession that as I thought about it, that statistics, only 1 in 5 Americans has direct and regular social contact with persons of another color. I think about myself down here, and except when I work in a children's Head Start program, now quarantined, I don't see and have contact with a person of another color. When I was at the school and in Syracuse, I had somewhat more of that. But if you had to ask me hard, how many real friends and social connections did I have over that included Black folks? 1, 2, 3, maybe. That I should be damned for. That's wrong. Now, and that's where it's got to start, though. I really believe. So he's absolutely right. Keep going.
Bob, Barry Wells would like to engage here. So Barry, if you would like to unmute your microphone and you can converse with the professor. Oh, Barry can't hear you. Let's see.
You can't hear me?
I can't hear Barry.
Oh.
It does look like you're unmuted. Matt, any thoughts, anything we can do here? Shoot.
Same here. It looks like he should be able to speak. I suspect it's a problem with his microphone.
Oh, shoot.
Barry, I promise, I know you've had your microphone unplugged before, but I promise I did not unplug your microphone.
Is there any troubleshooting we can do for Barry? Anything we can?
Sometimes he can go to settings and privacy and go to Zoom and make sure his microphone is actually on.
Gotcha.
And make sure nothing else is using his microphone on his local system.
Yeah, if you have any other streaming systems up, Barry, that can get in the way sometimes. If you can knock those out, taking headphones off, maybe.
Yeah, I just.
Yep. If you speak up, we can hear you, Barry.
I can hear you, Barry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Finally.
Oh, there he is. I can see.
You can even see me. Sorry about that.
That old gray hair. I can see.
Got it. And
your office looks just the same.
It's called the silent generation. They preceded the boomers. So they do include people of your age group. And in any case, I just wanted to say that in terms of talking about a TRC, this is really following what we call a restorative justice model. And that model is preferable to what one might call a punitive justice model. And I think in the final analysis, what we're discussing right now, what's taking place in this country, is an issue of justice. We're talking about racial justice, particularly as it pertains to Black Americans and also Native Americans. And we could look at a punitive justice model, which was used post World War I and also World War II. Nuremberg trials being a classic example of that. But a restorative justice model has been tried through these National Truth and Reconciliation Commissions since the 1970s across the world, and at least 40 countries. And so one of the things that we need to think about is, if we're going to consider this, is let's study. Let's put the best minds this country has together. And if future President Joe Biden decides to do this, study what has worked and what has not worked in terms of these other commissions across the world before we set up our own, if that's a model that we want to utilize. And never say never. And I was shocked to read that Lloyd's of London recently apologized for its shameful role in 18th and 19th century Atlantic slave trade. And I'm beyond even going to talking about an apology, they're also talking about making some financial or funding opportunities to Black and brown people. Now, whether that turns out to be what someone calls reparations or not, I don't know, but it is an amends. And in order for this country to move forward and to address these issues of racial injustice, in my opinion, as a result of systematic and structural racism in this country. Such a commission is necessary in order for us to heal. And there are 4 things that would have to be included. And there are examples of this around the world. But when we're talking about reconciliation, I'm finishing with this. One is there's got to be an expression of remorse. This country has never apologized for its original sin. Never. Secondly, it has to admit responsibility for what it has done, particularly as we're talking about Black and yellow people in this country. Third, if you're really serious about reconciliation, you've got to talk about amends. And so, Dr. Buckley and you were talking about this issue. Does that mean reparations? I'm talking about making amends, whether it turns out to be reparations, whether it turns out to be investments. I don't care how it's done. I could call what this country did post 2008 to the financial industry in this country reparations. What they just recently did to the airline industry could be called reparations. This country, if it decides to do something, can do it. The fourth thing has to be a promise that the unjust actions and behaviors will not be repeated, that it will change. That's the only way we're going to heal.
My good man, good words. I will never use reparations. It's always going to be amends. And I'm always going to remember Brother Wells when I use that word. You know so much more about this, and that's such a prudent and measured way to begin. And when Joe Biden calls me and asks me who would be on the commission to plan this out, I'm going to say, Brother Joe, you better go get Brother Wells. That's the man you want. I love you, buddy. Thanks for doing it.
Bob, we've got a lot of great comments in the chat box. We will, of course, forward them on to you so you can see people.
Can't we keep going?
We can keep going a little bit. We're past time, and some folks have had to leave and have sent their regards.
Well, that's okay, but if we got still people got, I said to Liz the other day, I'm prepared to do this till 4:30 at least and longer. This is what I've always wanted out of this. I've got people to talk, and to talk essentially to each other. Yeah. This is what we want, I think. Why turn it off?
I agree. If
they want to go, anybody can go. It's a free country.
So to that note, wanted to just let folks know, and we appreciate it, and we will continue. Lisa Rochford has her hand up, and so she can unmute her microphone, and you should be able to see and hear her.
Dr. Reverend Rochford.
Okay.
Dr. Reverend Scott.
And I have to say, the best sermon teacher I ever had was Bob McClure. It got me going on the right word. I give his sermons that my congregation say I give historical context, and I truly point back to Maxwell and say, thank you, Maxwell, you taught me well. And given that, I just wanted to say, as somebody that moved out as a ordained preacher lady 30 years ago to the great Republic of California, it was right before the riots of the 90s. The saying is that the way the country goes, the way California goes is the way the country eventually goes. We have not been perfect these last 30 years, but we have made strides. And a lot of it was because of reconciliation commissions on every level. And I speak from the liberal Christian viewpoint, which is so far from, in some ways, the evangelical politics. But it takes that long arc of moving. And one of the things that was fascinating in the recent riots, now that were nationwide, of course, is how many groups came together in California saying, we've been here, we've done this, and we are moving forward, but be it ever so slowly. And historically, will history treat us kindly that we're moving in the right direction? I believe so. And I really appreciated the 4-point discussion of what reparations perhaps looks like, or what the future looks like.
Amends.
Amends. There we go.
You were able to say that word.
Yes, sir. Amen. But we'll get there. But I do agree with you, sir. I think revolution is coming, and I think we've seen it coming here for the last 30 years in very real ways. In some ways, because we're the 5th largest GNP, the Republic of California stands alone in its own little world. But I do think that you can look to some of the things are, especially in the LAPD, which now in the recent riots, the LA Sheriff's Department is coming to reckoning with. We're moving slowly, but I agree. I think we have to move together for it to happen, or there will just be more blood on the streets.
Did you serve on any of those commissions, Lisa?
I served within the church structures. Yeah, we were all called to serve part of that. We're all called to do as much, like you were saying, reaching out on a very individual level, but have our congregations, our institutions. I worked in a school for a while, very much in the school setting, the institutions. We set up a lot of educational special ways of bringing together groups that otherwise wouldn't meet. So yeah, it very much comes down to exactly what you say. Each and every one of us individually, with just wherever we are, what we can do that is going to push this forward.
Well, it's good to see you, my dear. God bless you.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Reverend McClure.
You got a God bless for me. Yours counts for more.
God bless you, all of you. And go SU.
Oh, SU. Hey, Bob, Bill is got his actual hand raised. He's on his iPhone, so he's letting us know he has a question. If he can unmute.
Who is this?
I just have Bill and his iPhone.
Bill.
He has his hand up. So Bill, if you can unmute.
Who is Bill?
We're going to have to get him to unmute, and you're still muted, Bill. Is there a mute button there on your phone? Oh, did he disappear? I lost him. He was there. He was raising his hand.
Hi, this is Jess. He's still there. I tried to unmute him and he just shifted positions.
Okay.
Bill, you should be unmuted.
Having some. Oh, there you are, probably, Bill. Nope.
There's Bill.
In the near term, while we try to get Bill straightened out, I see a gentleman named John Robert McClure with his hand up. So, John, why don't you come on and unmute your phone and enable your camera and have at it, John. We still got you muted there, but if you can unmute, you'd be good to go. John, you there? He looks frozen. We're having a few bits of technical difficulties here. Okay, so no Bill, and John seems frozen at the moment. Anyone else like to engage with Professor McClure on the topics? John, oh, Mike, go ahead, please. Mike's waving his hand there. So, yeah. Mike, please go ahead.
I don't know where that virtual hand wave is. I was looking for it, but I just wanted to say, and Bob, nice to see you. And I very much appreciate your comments. I did want to say one thing. I think that part of the solution in this country is to try and come together more frequently. And the military has been, I think, a shining star in the American firmament. Throughout my lifetime, I have benefited from the contacts that I made when I served in Vietnam with people from, with black and white friends from all around the country. And I think that we make a mistake when we limit it to military action. I mean, we certainly could have service to this country for everyone, but it doesn't necessarily have to be military. And I think it would be better if it weren't. But ultimately, I think part of the main solution is coming together with people of different perspectives and learning to get along with each other, because we are so far apart now. And I don't know how it ever comes back together again.
Well,
Can you hear Bill Rosenberg?
Just one second, Bill. Yep, you'll be next. Go ahead, Bob.
Mike, I couldn't agree with you more. And I often use the military as an example throughout our history of being an institution in society, probably more than any other, in my view, that has helped make one out of many.
Yeah.
It did it at the Revolutionary War. It did it after the Civil War. It did it after World War II. In my view, the only time America has ever been close to one community was after World War II for a short period of time, during World War II, and after for a short period of time. When outside pressures and the fact that we were forced to work together and go to war together, did we finally have some sense of a greater sense of one community. And so I think you're absolutely right about the role the services have played. But I always hearken back when someone says something like you said to me, however much I agree with it. My colleague Charlotte Grimes and I used to teach a course on democracy and the press together. And one of the exercises we frequently used was to ask students to write a paper for us on universal compulsory community service. Now, they could choose the military if they wanted. They could choose anything else. Or no, they couldn't choose. They just had to sign up for it. And some of them might get to military, some might get a Head Start, some might get whatever. But we never could get a majority of young people in the late 2010s to by a majority to agree to that. They wanted a one America, and they wanted, but when it came down, you mean I'm studying to be a doctor, and I've got to go now and work in some poor school district in Los Angeles for 2 years? It's going to interrupt everything. I can't do that. Yeah. And they were very well-meaning, intentioned young folks until you said, well, you're not going to have the choice here of furthering your own wants. You're going to have to put your talents in service of others who need it. And we never were able to sell it.
Yeah, and you know, Bob, I think you know how much I admire Bobby Kennedy. And in a speech before students at the University of Indiana, at one point, he was talking to young medical students and imploring them that they needed to come and participate in our society. And someone got up and gave him a pushback in the way that you're talking about right now, saying, who's going to do this? And Bobby looked him right in the eye and he said, "You are." And I think that's what it comes down to. We need leaders who are going to say, if we want to change this country to be what we aspire to be, we're all going to have to put our shoulders to the wheel, and it's going to require real sacrifice from all of us. And I think that for too long, Americans have neglected their obligations to this democracy, and we're now seeing the fruit of that failure, and it's a very sad thing. And I only hope that we can, dig our way back out of this in the fall, because we are really on a pathway to destruction, and it's very painful.
I suspect that speech you heard was while Bobby came to the congressional district that my congressman represented during that trip, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's a special memory, and I don't know whether you were ever in my office, the Maxwell School, but there were some pictures in the background, and one of them was a picture of Bobby in the motorcade with his hand out, and it was being reached for by another hand as the car drove by. It was one of my favorite pictures, and I still have it.
Yeah, truly one of the great American politicians.
Well, like all politicians, he had his good angels and his lesser angels.
Couldn't agree more.
We got reconnected with the people we lost here. So Bill Rosenberg, I think you're on, and I think you're able to.
The Bill
connect.
was Rosenberg?
It was indeed. So Bill, go ahead.
He is even older than I am.
Well, I'm going to be 80 later this year, so maybe I am.
Just barely you're older than I am.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you, my friend. How are you?
Yes, indeed. I'm very good. When I came to Syracuse, I arrived in September, I think it was, 1957. And of course, those were the days when you were required to take citizenship as a required course in the College of Liberal Arts. And I took it, and it opened my eyes to so much. And I think if I were to summarize what it meant for me as an individual, having been brought up in Long Island and gone to a public school,
I would have never guessed that. You don't sound like it at all, Bill.
Yeah, that's because I've been away from Long Island for a while. Or as we used to say, Long Island, was that really America was a land of opportunity. And if you worked hard enough and got proper counsel from parents and faculty and other mentors, you can pretty much do whatever you work to do. And over the years, I have been very successful in a variety of ways. But I think the key is education. And maybe in the context of our conversation today, it's pretty hard to equalize or provide opportunity in every area that is important. And we all know what the areas are that matter. But you can't do it in every one at once. I mean, maybe you can, but let's focus for a moment on providing truly equal opportunity and education at Syracuse University. I've been there around the university for a long time. I've seen back in the late 50s when coach of our football team, acceded to the fact that the black members of the team could not go to, were not invited to the dinner that Saturday night before the Cotton Bowl, which we won and won the national championship about. But that was a Syracuse University approved discrimination. And then later on, when the university started to increase the enrollment of blacks at the university, there became a segregated attitude. The blacks were here, and the whites were here, and they did not mix very much, except maybe on the athletic fields. And we just went forward. I'm sure things are different now, but if we were to look at the role of the blacks and at the university right now, it'd be very interesting to hear what they have to say after all these years, and what could the university do, or what does the university need to do to, at least in this sphere of life, create equal opportunity. That's my point.
Well, I think Barry Wells would be far better at answering and responding to you than I. But I would say that, to the best of my knowledge, as I follow the news about Syracuse University, our black students today are doing a pretty good job of letting the university know where it seems to be falling short, according to their eyes, and what needs to be done. The position of black students at Syracuse University in regard to their ability to speak out about their understanding of slights and deprivations, substantially different than when you were there, Bill, and even when I was hanging around. What it will lead to, I don't know. I do think that the chancellor has an open heart and an open ear. He's listening. Now, what can come of his listens, I don't know. There was another one?
There is your son out there. John, you want to unmute your microphone? I know you had some internet problems before, but I think you're good now.
Yeah, I was just curious to see if you and Barry Wells might try to address. It may just be my way of wanting to make everything a problem of narrative, but thinking about Dr. Buckley's comments about the function of Reconciliation Commission as sort of being the struggle itself. I'm wondering about how to construct a consensus narrative of American history that is closer to the truth and can be shared widely among all Americans. I know plenty of people who derive a lot of dignity and pride from this country and being a citizen of this country. But I know a lot of people also who justifiably orient this country's history around its atrocities, its genocide of Native peoples and the enslavement of Black Americans, and who deeply believe this country should be ashamed and must atone. And I'm wondering to what extent those are sort of incommensurable narratives, or is there a way to tell a story about this country that leaves room for both of those things at the same time? Is that something a commission could possibly construct?
Well, as you have accused me of all of your life, I'm going to dodge that question, at least a bit at the beginning. Barry, are you still with us? He addressed you about this. Can you take a stab at it first, and then I'll join in? Is Barry still here?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Did you hear John? Did you hear John, buddy?
I heard. Can you hear me?
You want to take a stab at it, and then I'll give it a go?
Yeah, my initial reaction is all voices must be heard. And clearly, this is not just going to be a discussion, a hearing that's going to wrap up in 1 or 2 weeks. You're looking at a marathon, in my opinion. And you're not only talking about people who have embraced the opportunities that this country has given to them and who have done well by that, but you're also talking about having people who have had the polar opposite experiences. These hearings have to be open. These hearings have to be covered. The press, the media, television stations, cable stations, if they're serious, are going to have to make sure that they give primetime opportunities for these hearings, for this commission, and the voices of those families of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, etc., also have to be at the table. And they have to be heard. They have to be given an opportunity to speak their truth. And if this is done in a righteous way, in a correct way, in a moral way, then perhaps, just perhaps, we'll have an opportunity to continue this change, this slow change that this country is under, moving towards a more perfect union. I'm not an optimist by any stretch of the imagination. And I don't think this is a panacea, but it's a start. It's a way to engage people in this country, those who have been advantaged, those who have been disadvantaged. And just to follow up when we talk about this issue of equal opportunity and even Syracuse University, and one of the things that Dr. King said many years ago, which is still applicable in many cases today, is this notion about the most segregated hour of the week. And that is, and for many communities, when people go to church. And we can look back to the Supreme Court decision that talked about desegregating our schools with all deliberate speed. And recent research says that, in fact, our public schools today are more segregated than they were back in the 50s. And so our students that come to our universities come from these communities, which are largely segregated communities. So if you grew up that way and that's your comfort level, then you go to university or you go to college and you are seeking to fit in, it's only natural that people are going to try to find people like themselves. And so an institution has to intervene if they're serious about bringing people together. But all of this stuff goes back to home, folks. It goes back to home. And this whole construct is set up on an economic model. Recently, in terms of what we've been going through with COVID-19 in New York State, Governor Cuomo has been coming out with these daily press briefings over 100 days or so. One of the things he talked about was the disparities of people who were getting sick and who were dying, largely being Black and brown people in New York State. And that's also been the case with some of the national research. But a lot of that is connected not only to health disparities, but educational disparities, and down the line, criminal justice disparities. So this is a journey. This is a long time that we're going to have to work together. We're going to have to listen to one another. We're going to have to try and see if we can come to some understanding of one another. So I'm not necessarily so optimistic that this is going to solve this country's 400-year-old problem, its original sin. But I haven't heard anything or seen anything that's going to bring us any closer than to begin to try to sit down and talk and listen and make appropriate amends where need be.
I agree with Barry, and I am worried about some of Barry. I agree that it's going to be a long process. And if we go down this road, it's years. I agree that all voices have to somehow or another be included into it. And I don't know what the more widely shared outcome will be, if any. But I think that must be the route to trying to find what there is, if any. What Barry says that is most troublesome to me, and I understand why he says it, but as an old journalist, I'm troubled by it. Once all of these commissions and hearings to be filtered through the media. He wants all of them open. I want them all open to the press, perhaps, but I don't want them all open to. The television and the press is never interested in consensus. It's only interested in division. And so the best way to divide America is to turn television, turn ABC News loose on America, or Fox News. I don't care who you do it. That's an uncontrollable urge for more disunion. Now, how you stop that in a free and open society? I don't know. You heard me say to Francine, I'm angry as hell at the New York Times for recanting on their cotton opposition op-ed. So I don't know how you do that. People have to see this commission as open and transparent, but it can't be the constant every night television that will defeat it for certain, in my view. So it's like the Constitution itself, and Barry may say, well, that's where it all started, and this was a Faustian bargain right there in the beginning. But yeah, I know you, buddy. But we got what we got there in no small part because it was behind closed doors. We wouldn't even got that if it'd been out there and Tom Paine had been able to take his shots at it. So this is a gamble. But I think Barry's son, I think it was Barry, idea that we start with Joe listening to Barry and 2 or 3 other smart people, and we try to put together a roadmap for this that's mindful of all the minefields that it's got to walk through. Did I dodge that one, son?
Bob, I think that's what we have for today. I appreciate it. We've gone just about 90 minutes now. There's an open invitation. We can bring you back at a future date, continue this conversation, or add to it, as I know you are working on lots of different writings and books.
Well, I feel like I've worn out my welcome, and I don't. There are many more people with many more and better ideas to talk about this than me. But I'm happy to come back after a long pause. I enjoy these things, as you know, because I haven't seen my old gray buddy for a long time. And Minch, it's been a long time since I've seen him. And Reverend Lisa, it's been a long time. All of these things.
Did you see Dean Palmer on as well?
No, my God.
He was on in video. He has since left, but he was on, watching carefully.
John's heard me so much, I thought he probably wouldn't tune in at all. So, but he was always wise. He knew when to quit. But it's fun seeing it. I am going to try. If David Bennett, I see, is still on here.
Oh yeah.
And he can unmute his phone or his microphone and turn on his camera. I'd love to see him.
Professor Bennett, are you there? Can you turn your camera on, turn your microphone on? Let me see.
I don't see him anymore.
I'm not seeing him either at this point,
Yeah.
Bob. He may have just jumped off. So sorry for that. We can try to connect you at a different time. He's concluding his teaching this fall. So he's hopeful to do that in Maxwell Auditorium. We shall see.
Well, you got to make that happen. Got to make that happen.
One way or another, we will.
You betcha. That's a must.
Sure. And
don't screw it up.
Speaking about others who can add to the conversation, Bob, a number of names you might be familiar with, but several of our advisory board members are continuing this conversation with us and for us next week. So I believe the date is June 30th that we'll have Travis Mason, James Willey, and James was on the call today, Nicole Collier, Lisa Gordon, Wes Diaz, all amazing Maxwell Advisory Board members who really are helpful and involved with us on these issues. And they will be on next week in a similar format, leading a talk.
Well, I'll. It's on my calendar, and I presume to join in.
Fantastic. That's June 30th at 2. And we'll continue through the summer. We've got all kinds of Maxwell faculty lining up that want to talk with our alums on the various topics of the day. So if you have any suggestions to our remaining guests, or certainly Bob, you have suggestions of programs we should be putting together, let me or let Jess Murray, our Director of Alumni, know. Jess and our ICT team do a great job putting these things together. So we thank them, and we thank Liz for making this happen, Liz Armstrong for making this happen as well.
You know, Liz is my minder. I talk through Liz.
Your agent of sorts, but
hard to be your minder.
That's my minder. That's my minder. I pay attention to my minder.
We've seen about 1,200 alums take part in these calls over the last couple of months. So we're so delighted to bring Maxwell to you all, and we're delighted that you're engaging with the school. Thank you all. Be well, and we'll see you soon. Take care.